Welcome back. All right, so for roughly the last week, I've been putting up polls on the community tab of the site. They are still there. So if you go to the channel, you go to community tab, you can vote. And so I wanted to do this before we go on holiday tomorrow because I wanted to take a look at where the polling has teams now. And it is interesting. It's always interesting to me to see where people have teams. And I did see posts about this is recency bias. We always have recency bias. We always look back to the season that just finished and say, well, why should that team fall apart? Why should that team be so much better? That team doesn't, this move won't fix that. And then, ta-da, it does. So looking at the standings from last season and plugging in the results so far, again, so yes, I'm saying, hey, if you haven't voted yet, because some of these teams have got well over 10,000 votes and some have less than 10,000 votes. So, and I understand too, fans of certain teams will be more interested in voting on where their team's going to finish than on where somebody else's team's going to finish. I also saw posts about, well, why didn't you make it, first, second, third, fourth, fifth, sixth, seventh, eighth? Because YouTube only allows 5 options when you're putting up a poll. So because you're only allowed 5 options, I had to restrict what I'm able to do. But it's fine because you can weight it that way and it still gives you an idea for where people think teams are at. Now, the recency bias is real. And I get it, absolutely, and I don't have a problem with it because it's always been there. We look at last year's predictions. We had the Blues in the playoffs, didn't we? We had Seattle out of the playoffs, and we had New Jersey right near the bottom. I'll talk about New Jersey when I get to the Eastern Conference, but I want to start with the West. So the Colorado Avalanche finished first this past season with 109 points. Some changes with them this offseason. We'll see how they work out, but the channel seems to be optimistic. They have 70% in terms of first or second place votes. The highest in the Central Division, 27% saying third or fourth. So that's 97% of the vote saying, yeah, Colorado's staying in the playoffs, which makes sense, right? So there's always going to be those votes that are just, well, I don't like this team, or, well, just for fun, I'll vote this team first when I know they're not going to be first. But in general, the results are still pretty much towards what people think is going to happen. And then Dallas, 108 points this past season. 57% say first or second, 36% say third or fourth. This is where it's interesting too. I guess Colorado, with the recent Stanley Cup win, that helps boost them. But they were only 1 point ahead of Dallas, and I don't know if they're going to finish ahead of Dallas this year. I'm kind of optimistic about the Stars. For the Minnesota Wild, we'll get to Minnesota first. Third or fourth, 66% said third or fourth for Minnesota, and 22% said fifth or sixth. So 103 points. They were 5 points behind Dallas, but voters feeling that there's a better chance of them falling down than moving up, right? And then for the Winnipeg Jets, fifth or sixth, 59% say fifth or sixth, which would be a drop for them, and 27% saying third or fourth. However, what's interesting is that in terms of fifth or sixth place votes, they're actually at a lower number than both Nashville and St. Louis, but it is close. For Nashville, fifth or sixth place, 60% saying they're going to finish there, 25% saying third or fourth. For St. Louis, fifth or sixth, 60% there as well, third or fourth, 19%. So, as fans, we are saying third or fourth, fifth, and sixth could be a dogfight, and Minnesota could be involved. And again, I don't think that when we're looking at the rosters for next year, when we're looking at the results from this past season, I don't think that's necessarily outside of the realm of reality. And then you get into basically agreed upon 7th and 8th place teams. Arizona, 65% voted 7th or 8th, 29% said 5th or 6th. And then for Chicago, 67% say 7th or 8th, 28% saying 5th or 6th. I'm mildly surprised that the numbers for Arizona and Chicago are almost identical, but not really. Although it feels like Arizona's in a little bit of a better spot right now than Chicago. I think Chicago is perfectly fine with getting the number 1 draft pick again next year. I think they'd be fine with that. Arizona, I think they've got a lot of prospects, a lot of guys coming in. They want to get better. So we'll see how this ages. Again, last year at this time, a lot of people feeling St. Louis was still going to be a playoff team, and then they weren't. Then we get over to the Pacific. 76% have Vegas staying in first or second. 20% say third or fourth. So 96% of the vote saying top 4 in the Pacific, and I will agree. Whereas for the Oilers, they have one more percentage point when it comes to first or second at 77%, but third or fourth, 19%. So that still comes out to 96. So virtually everybody agreeing that the powers in this division will remain the Oilers and the Vegas Golden Knights. But what's interesting is LA sitting 5 points back of Edmonton last year. Third or fourth, 66% of the vote. First or second, 22%. So that's 88% all overall. So this should be your top three, right? But LA was only 4 points ahead of Seattle. Can Seattle have another jump? The channel thinks probably not. Third or fourth, 71%. First or second, 15%. So that's 86%. I've seen some trying to argue that Seattle's going to fall off. Maybe, but they need teams behind them to get better, right? So for Calgary, you were 93 points good this past season. And good because that's still one more point than Florida had. But 56% of you said that they'll be fifth or sixth. 32% said third or fourth. Vancouver, if these numbers turn out to be accurate for Vancouver, it's going to be a long year. Fifth or sixth, 54%. Seventh or eighth, 28%. That's 82% of the vote. And again, and I say this as a Canuck fan, I don't think that's necessarily wrong. I think the Vancouver Canucks have found ways to miss the playoffs almost every year since 2015. So betting on them to miss the playoffs again, it does feel like that would be a safe one. And then you get into the likely seventh or eighth. San Jose Sharks, 85% of the channel said seventh or eighth. 11% optimistic at fifth or sixth. That's 96% of the vote. So there were 4% who either voted saying, to heck with it, I'll put him in the top four, and then at the end of the year I can claim I'm a genius. Or, you know what? I don't think this is stupid, so I'm going to vote San Jose first or second. Or maybe it was an oops. Then you get to the Anaheim Ducks. 73% voted seventh or eighth, and 22% said fifth or sixth. That's 95% of the vote having them staying fifth or lower. And since they had 58 points this past season, that's a pretty good bet. So let us take a look at the East. So again, there's some recency bias when we get to the East. However, Boston is being seen as a team that's going to fall off. 135 points this past season, but 52% of you voted third or fourth for Boston. 31% fifth or sixth. There's definitely some hate vote there. There is. There's definitely a large portion of fans who are like, nope, it's time for Boston to fall off. And again, as a Boston fan, all I hear in the back of my head is, so they win the draft lottery and then everybody gets mad. Cool. For Toronto, 111 points. First or second, they're the only team in the Atlantic that the majority of voters felt they'd be first or second with 63%. So that means that the channel's saying, yeah, Toronto's probably going to be first. Third or fourth, 28%. So that's 91% of the vote having them staying in the top four, whereas only 52% of the vote sees Boston in the top four. So this is where when I get to doing season previews when I get home, these numbers are handy. Tampa Bay, who had 98 points this past season, 63% of you say they're going to be third or fourth. 20% have them first or second. So even though Tampa Bay finishes 37 points behind Boston, there's more optimism about Tampa than there is about Boston. For Florida, third or fourth, 58% of you have them finishing there. 26% say first or second. So this is interesting too, that there is more optimism regarding a Florida Panthers team that finished 1 point ahead of Buffalo than there is for a Tampa Bay Lightning team, and definitely more than there is for Boston. So Boston, by my count, favored to fall to fourth in the division or further, because Buffalo, third or fourth, 58% of the channel had them there, 31% had them fifth or sixth. So again, that means that Buffalo got a better overall vote than Boston. And again, I am well aware of the hate vote that's there for Boston. I know that's a large portion of the vote. But yeah, it's just interesting to see these numbers. For Ottawa, fifth or sixth, 50% of you had them there. Third or fourth, 36% had them there. Less optimism when it comes to the Detroit Red Wings, fifth or sixth. 60% voted for them fifth or sixth. 25% third or fourth. And again, it is interesting because of how close these teams were. Now, Detroit's numbers were deflated after the trade deadline. They traded guys off, and their record just absolutely fell apart. So I think they're better than that 80 points, but again, that's where we're at. Now, what's interesting, too, when you get into the Atlantic Division, and part of the reason I saved the East for last, is you have Montreal 7th or 8th, 61% had them there. 5th or 6th, 31% had them there. So that's 92% of the vote. But they're the only team with 7th or 8th as the highest as receiving the most votes. So this is where it gets really interesting to me, because this is a tough division. And this is a division where you have some optimism about some teams, because nobody sees Detroit, Ottawa, Buffalo as potentially being 7th or 8th, or favorites to finish 7th or 8th. Nobody else has 7th or 8th in their top 2. So Montreal is basically accepted as the worst team in the Atlantic. And again, it makes some sense because these 4 teams we know are pretty good. And these 3 teams here seem to be improving. And Buffalo looks like they're due to finally break a playoff drought this year. But again, until it happens, we'll see. And then you get over to the Metro, first or second for Carolina. They got the most votes, 82%. So either Canes fans came out and represented and just made sure that everybody knew that Canes are going to be it, or people just generally accept that the Canes are one of the top 2 teams in that division. Third or fourth, 16%. That's 98% of the vote. So pretty strong endorsement that the Carolina Hurricanes are going to continue to be excellent in the Metro. For New Jersey, this is where it gets interesting, because 82% of the channel last year picked New Jersey to finish 5th or lower. And most picked them to finish 5th or 6th. And then the second vote was for 7th or 8th. So again, if you're concerned like, oh, my team's underrated, maybe they are. Maybe they are. And as fans, the recency bias is there. But now that New Jersey has that 112-point season, which was only 1 behind Carolina, the optimism's through the roof. 73% of you voted first or second for New Jersey, 21% third or fourth. So those numbers tell me, yeah, the optimism around the New Jersey Devils pretty good. 94% of the channel's vote went towards them staying in the top 4. The New York Rangers, 62% seeing them as third or fourth, 28% seeing them as first or second. They finished 5 points behind New Jersey. They were close to the most of the season, too. So we'll see, right? That's one of those we'll see things. The New York Islanders, not a lot of optimism about the New York Islanders. 5th or 6th, 58% of the vote had them there. Third or fourth, 29% of the vote had them there. For Pittsburgh, there's more optimism about Pittsburgh. I did post this after Erik Karlsson got traded. So this poll went live after Karlsson got traded to the Penguins. 57% of the vote. 57% of the vote having them finishing 5th or finishing third or fourth. 30% having them finishing 5th or 6th. So Pittsburgh's optimism is there, and definitely sees them finishing ahead of the New York Islanders, which then gets into a whole other conversation. Would there be 5 teams from the Atlantic and 3 teams in the Metro that make the playoffs, or will it be 4 and 4? Because again, it's possible that fans could be voting and saying, well, Pittsburgh finishes ahead of the Islanders. Yeah, but is Pittsburgh going to finish ahead of Boston or Buffalo if those are going to be the teams that are at the bottom? So I may have more polls coming out on what you, the fans, think is going to happen, and then I'll incorporate some of that into previews and official channel voting. So the Washington Capitals, who finished with 80 points, they fell apart after the deadline, much like Detroit. 5th or 6th, 65% of the vote has them there. 17% say 7th or 8th. So not a lot of optimism with the Capitals. The Flyers, no optimism there. 77% have them 7th or 8th, which is the highest number on this board. And let me just take a quick look here. Yeah, 77% is the highest number of any team to have 7th or 8th votes. Even more than... No, San Jose was first with 85%. But Philadelphia is second. They're actually ahead of Anaheim in the 7th or 8th voting. 5th or 6th, 19% you had them there. So 96% of the votes say, yeah, they're going to be 5th or lower. Whereas Columbus, a little more optimism, but not enough if you're Jarmo Kekalainen. 7th or 8th, 47% of the vote have Columbus there. 5th or 6th, 42% of the vote has Columbus finishing there. Columbus, of course, with 59 points. Philadelphia with 75. But Columbus has made moves to improve in the offseason. They've changed their coach. The Philadelphia Flyers have embraced the rebuild process. Thus the reason that there's more optimism for Columbus than there is for Philly. But again, 89% of the votes say Columbus is going to be 5th or lower, and that could mean Kekalainen's job. If Columbus misses the playoffs again after all these big moves he's made, we'll see. But it's going to be a very interesting regular season. I'm excited about it. We are sitting 6 weeks out now from the start of the preseason, which means we're roughly, 8 weeks out from the start of the regular season, somewhere in that range. And then we get to all of these predictions all fall by the wayside. They all fall by the wayside. I did look, though. Toronto right now for first or second, the vote's right about the same as last year. I think they had 60% of the vote last year. So it is staying right about the same, which is fun. I think that's great. So let me know your thoughts. Where does the channel have it wrong? Where does the channel have it right? Which team do you think people are sleeping on? And which team do you think people are inflating? That's going to drop. So the recency bias is there. The recency bias is there every time out. Every year, it's something I've discussed before. It's fascinating. It's there. And yes, I have that as well. In part, I think it's because if, let's say that I try to make the argument, well, Tampa Bay is going to fall apart. And I really like what Montreal did. I think Montreal's going to make the playoffs. Trying to make a logical argument to make that work is difficult until you have the data. And you don't have the data until the next season really starts up. So it really is a guessing game, but it's a fun guessing game. Let me know your thoughts. Hit like and subscribe if you're browsing your way through. You just happened upon this video. Thank you guys so much for watching, for all your support. I will talk to you again soon.